Karen. Next door loses her mind. When our property line fence blocks her right-of-way, the revenge she took made national news. How a $3,200 fence led to a nightmare that cost us $78,000 and terrorized our family for 16 months. It started with something so simple, so reasonable, that not once did we imagine it would spiral into a living nightmare that would consume nearly 2 years of our lives, drain our savings account, and eventually make headlines across the country. We wanted a fence. That's it. Just a standard 6-foot wooden privacy fence around our backyard, so our kids could play safely and our golden retriever, Max, could run around without a leash. Nothing fancy, nothing provocative, nothing that anyone in their right mind would object to. But then again, we weren't dealing with someone in their right mind. We were dealing with Karen. That's not her real name, of course, but it might as well have been. She embodied every stereotype of the entitled neighbor who believes the world should bend to her will. And when it doesn't, well, that's when things get dangerous. This is the story of how a simple fence turned our peaceful suburban life into a waking nightmare. How one woman's obsession with a right-of-way that never legally existed led to vandalism, false police reports, stalking, and eventually a courtroom drama that none of us saw coming. It's a story about property rights, mental instability, and what happens when someone with too much time and too little perspective decides to make your life their personal mission. The $3,200 decision that changed everything. My wife Sarah and I moved into our modest 4-bedroom home in Oak Ridge Estates 5 years ago. It was our first real house after years of apartment living, and we were thrilled to finally have a yard, a garage, and space for our growing family. We had twin 7-year-old boys who needed room to run, and a good school district was our top priority. The neighborhood seemed perfect. Quiet streets, well-maintained homes, and friendly neighbors who brought over cookies and welcomed us to the community. All except for Patricia Wilkins, who lived in the 2-story colonial directly to our right. From day one, Patricia was cold, barely acknowledging our waves or greetings. We didn't think much of it at first. Not everyone is the neighborly type, and that was fine with us. Live and let live, right? What we didn't realize at the time was that Patricia had been using our unfenced yard as a shortcut to the community mailboxes and the walking trail that ran behind our development. Rather than walking down her driveway, around the block, and to the trail entrance like everyone else, she'd cut directly through our property, saving herself perhaps 2 minutes of walking time. For the first few years, we didn't notice or care much. We weren't outside that often due to work schedules, and when we were, Patricia seemed to time her shortcuts for when we weren't around. It wasn't until we got Max, our golden retriever puppy, that things began to change. Max would bark whenever someone crossed through our yard, which suddenly seemed to be happening much more frequently than we'd realized. We'd catch glimpses of Patricia power walking through our property, designer athleisure wear and oversized sunglasses on, AirPods in her ears, deliberately not making eye contact. Maybe we should finally put up that fence we've been talking about, Sarah suggested one evening after we'd watched Patricia cut across our yard for the 3rd time that day. The boys would love to be able to play outside more freely. And Max needs the exercise. We researched options, got quotes from 3 different contractors, and eventually settled on a simple but attractive wooden privacy fence that would enclose our backyard completely. At $3,200, it wasn't cheap, but we'd been saving for home improvements, and this seemed like a worthwhile investment in our family's enjoyment of our property. The contractor assured us that the fence would be built entirely on our property, a few inches inside our lot line, to ensure there would be no encroachment issues. We applied for the proper permits, received approval from our city and HOA, and scheduled installation for the following month. We even sent courtesy notes to our adjacent neighbors, including Patricia, letting them know about the upcoming construction. Patricia didn't respond to our note. Not with a call, not with a text, not even with a wave from her window. The installation took 3 days in total. By Friday afternoon, our beautiful new fence was complete, enclosing our backyard in a wooden embrace that promised privacy, security, and peace of mind. The boys were ecstatic, immediately breaking in the space with an impromptu soccer game, while Max raced around in circles, drunk on newfound freedom. Sarah and I sat on our back deck with glasses of wine, watching our little family enjoy the yard, feeling that particular satisfaction that comes from making your home better, more comfortable, more yours. That feeling lasted exactly 47 minutes. The $16,000 mistake. Underestimating Patricia's rage. The pounding on our front door was so violent that pictures rattled on the walls. Max started barking frantically, and the boys froze mid-game, eyes wide with alarm. "I'll get it," I said to Sarah, setting down my wine glass and heading inside. Through the front window, I could see Patricia on our porch, face contorted with an anger so intense it made me pause before opening the door. I barely had it open before she started shouting. "How dare you build this monstrosity, without consulting me first?" she shrieked, gesturing wildly toward our backyard. "You've completely blocked my access path. I have been walking that way for 15 years. I was so taken aback that it took me a moment to respond. "Patricia, I'm sorry if this is inconvenient, but it's our property. We sent you a courtesy note about the fence." "A note?" she interrupted, her voice rising even higher. "A note doesn't make up for blocking my right-of-way. I have an easement. This is illegal." By now, Sarah had come inside, ushering the boys and Max in with her, closing the back door against the scene unfolding on our front porch. "There's no easement on our property," I said, trying to keep my voice calm and reasonable. "We checked thoroughly before installation. The city approved our permits. The fence is completely on our land." Patricia's face flushed an alarming shade of red. "I'm calling my lawyer," she hissed. "And the HOA, and the city? You'll be taking this fence down by Monday. I promise you that." With that, she spun on her heel and stormed off our property, nearly bowling over our elderly neighbor from across the street, who had been walking his dog and had stopped to witness the commotion. "Don't worry about old Patricia," he called to us with a sympathetic smile. "She thinks she owns the whole neighborhood. Nice fence, by the way." We thanked him and went back inside, rattled, but not yet understanding that this was just the opening salvo in what would become an all-out war. Over the next 2 weeks, Patricia launched what could only be described as a shock and awe campaign against our fence. She filed complaints with the HOA, dismissed as we had followed all guidelines. She called the city's zoning department, who reconfirmed our permits were in order. She even had a paralegal friend send us a threatening letter about her historic right-of-way, which our own hastily consulted real estate attorney assured us was complete nonsense. The costs were adding up quickly. The consultation with the real estate attorney, $750. The surveyor we hired to reconfirm our property lines when Patricia claimed the fence encroached on her land, $12,200. The time off work to meet with HOA representatives and city officials who had to respond to her constant complaints, priceless. But the worst was yet to come. It was about 3 weeks after Fence Day, as we'd come to call it, that we woke up to find 3 panels of our new fence smashed in, splintered wood scattered across the grass. Our first thought was that a deer had somehow crashed through it, or maybe a drunk driver had veered off the road. But when we checked our newly installed security camera, another $950 expense, the footage showed a figure in dark clothing and a hoodie systematically attacking our fence with what looked like a sledgehammer at 2:14 a.m. The police came, took statements, viewed the footage, but explained that while the figure was approximately Patricia's height and build, the face was never clearly visible, and the hoodie and darkness made identification impossible. "We can't prove it was her," the officer said apologetically, "but I'd recommend upgrading your security system and adding more cameras. Another $1,400 for a comprehensive security system with motion sensors and better cameras. Repair costs for the fence, $850. Our sense of security in our own home shattered." This was the beginning of a campaign of petty vandalism and harassment that would cost us over $16,000 in repairs, security upgrades, and legal fees over the next 6 months. Our yard lights were smashed. Our mailbox was knocked over, twice. Dog waste appeared on our front porch. Our cars were keyed when parked in our driveway, and each time the perpetrator was careful to avoid clear identification on camera. But Patricia made sure we knew it was her. She would watch us from her windows as we discovered each new violation. She would smile coldly when passing us on the street. Once, after a particularly costly act of vandalism, our garden hoses slashed and water left running overnight, flooding part of our yard to the tune of a $500 water bill, she stopped on the sidewalk in front of our house and said, just loudly enough for me to hear as I cleaned up the mess, "Fences make terrible neighbors, don't they?" The $42,000 escalation, when harassment becomes dangerous. 6 months into what we now referred to as the fence wars, things took a much darker turn. It began with phone calls, dozens of them, at all hours of the day and night. Sometimes silent, sometimes with just breathing, sometimes with a whispered, "Take down the fence," before hanging up. We changed our number, went unlisted. The calls stopped for 2 blissful days before resuming. Then came the false reports. Animal control showed up one day, responding to a complaint that we were running an illegal dog breeding operation with at least 15 dogs in our home. Another day, it was Child Protective Services investigating an anonymous tip that our children were being neglected and living in filthy conditions. The health department came to investigate a reported sewage leak in our yard. Each time, the officials quickly realized the reports were false, but each visit was humiliating, stressful, and time-consuming. But the real terror began the night we heard a crash from the boys' bedroom. It was just after midnight. Sarah and I had been watching a movie in the living room when the sound of breaking glass and our son's frightened cries sent us racing upstairs. Someone had thrown a rock through their bedroom window, sending glass shards across the room where they slept. By some miracle, neither boy was cut, but the rock had landed just inches from our son Jake's head. Attached to the rock was a note. "No fence equal safe kids." That was the moment everything changed. This wasn't about property rights anymore. This wasn't about a shortcut or a right of way. This was a threat against our children. The police took this incident far more seriously than the vandalism. They collected the rock, the note, and pieces of glass as evidence. They increased patrols of our street. A detective interviewed us at length about our history with Patricia and asked if we wanted to file for a restraining order. We did. The temporary order was granted immediately, and a court date was set for a permanent order. We hired a lawyer specializing in harassment cases, another $5,000 retainer that we put on a credit card because our savings were dwindling rapidly. Patricia was served with the temporary restraining order, requiring her to stay at least 100 feet away from our family members, our home, and the boys' school. She responded by hiring her own attorney, who filed a countersuit claiming emotional distress and property devaluation due to our fence, seeking $250,000 in damages. The legal battle that ensued over the next 10 months was exhausting, both financially and emotionally. Depositions, evidence gathering, expert witnesses, property assessments, psychological evaluations, the costs spiraled to over $42,000, draining our savings and forcing us to take out a second mortgage on our home. During this time, the direct harassment subsided somewhat, likely because Patricia knew she was under scrutiny, but the psychological toll was immense. Our boys started having nightmares. Sarah developed anxiety so severe she was prescribed medication. I found myself checking and rechecking our security cameras dozens of times a day. We installed blackout curtains over the new reinforced windows. We stopped using our beautiful backyard because being outside made us feel exposed, watched. Our once peaceful home had become a fortress, and we were prisoners inside it. The $20,000 game changer, an unexpected ally. The turning point came from an unexpected source: Patricia's ex-husband. Michael Wilkins reached out to our attorney about 8 months into the legal proceedings. He had heard about the situation from their adult daughter, who was horrified by her mother's behavior. Michael had been divorced from Patricia for nearly a decade and lived in another state, but he had information he thought might help us. Patricia has a history of this kind of fixation, he explained during a meeting with our lawyer. During our marriage, she became obsessed with our previous neighbors over a Japanese maple tree that she claimed was dropping leaves into our pool. She harassed them for years, called their employers, spread rumors they were dealing drugs, even followed their children to school. We had to move twice because of situations she created with neighbors. Michael provided documentation of psychiatric evaluations Patricia had undergone during their divorce proceedings, which diagnosed her with several personality disorders that manifested in territorial obsessions and an inability to recognize boundaries, both physical and interpersonal. I tried to get her help for years, he said. She would start treatment, then convince herself she was fine and discontinue it. After the divorce, I couldn't do anything more. I'm sorry it's happened to your clients. No one deserves to live in fear like this. This information was potentially game-changing for our case, but our lawyer advised caution. Medical records are heavily protected by privacy laws, and using them in court would be challenging. However, Michael was willing to testify about his experiences, and he could legally speak about what he had personally witnessed during their marriage. The cost of adding this new evidence and witness to our case, including additional depositions and expert psychiatric testimony to establish a pattern of behavior, another $20,000 we didn't have. It's worth it, Sarah said when we discussed it late into the night. If it means we can stay in our home without living in constant fear, it's worth going further into debt. I agreed, but with a heavy heart. Our dream home had become a financial and emotional black hole. We were now close to $80,000 in debt because of a $3,200 fence. The irony wasn't lost on us. The day that made national headlines. The case was scheduled for court on a Tuesday morning in June, nearly 16 months after we'd installed our fence. We were prepared for a multi-day trial, with witnesses lined up, evidence organized, and our attorney ready for battle. What we weren't prepared for was Patricia's spectacular public meltdown, which would catapult our private neighborhood dispute onto screens across America. The trouble began during the first day of proceedings. Patricia had become increasingly agitated as Michael testified about her history of neighbor fixations and boundary issues. When our attorney presented footage from our security cameras showing a figure matching Patricia's build vandalizing our property, she leapt to her feet. "Those videos are fake!" she shouted, pointing a trembling finger at us. "They're framing me! This is a conspiracy!" The judge ordered her to sit down and warned that another outburst would result in contempt charges. Patricia complied, but the look she gave us sent chills down my spine. During the lunch recess, reporters from the local news were gathered outside the courthouse. Our case had attracted some media attention due to the unusual nature of the dispute and the escalating harassment claims. As we exited the building, several reporters approached us for comment. "We just want this to be over so our family can feel safe in our home again," I said simply, with Sarah nodding beside me. As we moved toward the courthouse steps, a commotion erupted behind us. Patricia had spotted us talking to the reporters and was charging forward, her face contorted with rage. "You liars!" she screamed. "You stole my right-of-way! You turned my husband against me! You won't get away with this!" Before her attorney could intervene, Patricia reached into her large purse and pulled out a can of red spray paint. With wild swings of her arm, she began spraying the courthouse steps, the reporters and herself still screaming about conspiracies and rights of way. When a courthouse security officer attempted to restrain her, she struck him with the paint can. The entire incident was captured by multiple news cameras and cell phones. By dinner time, videos of the Fence Karen, as social media quickly dubbed her, attacking reporters and security personnel outside a courthouse were trending nationwide. By the next morning, the clips had made it to national morning shows and cable news. Our identity was mostly protected in the reporting. We were referred to simply as the neighbor family, but Patricia's face and full name were everywhere. The videos showed her being restrained and led back into the courthouse in handcuffs, red paint covering her designer blouse, still yelling about her right-of-way. Court was recessed for the day following the incident. Patricia was held for psychiatric evaluation and charged with assault on a court officer, destruction of public property, and contempt of court. When proceedings resumed 2 days later, Patricia was noticeably subdued. Her attorney requested a brief recess to confer with our legal team. Within an hour, a settlement was proposed. Patricia would drop all claims against us, agree to a permanent restraining order, and move away from the neighborhood within 60 days. In exchange, we would not pursue civil damages for the harassment and vandalism. After a brief discussion with our attorney, Sarah and I agreed to the terms. We wanted nothing more than for this nightmare to end, for our family to feel safe again. Pursuing additional damages might satisfy some desire for justice, but it would also mean prolonging our involvement with Patricia. We were ready to move on. The judge approved the settlement, making the restraining order permanent and adding several provisions. Patricia was prohibited from contacting us through any means, directly or through third parties. She was barred from coming within 500 feet of our home, workplaces, or the boys' school, and she was required to continue psychiatric treatment as a condition of avoiding jail time for the courthouse assault. As we left the courthouse that day, reporters once again approached us. This time, I allowed myself a moment of candor. All of this, the fear, the anxiety, the financial burden, the court battle, all of it, because one person couldn't walk an extra 2 minutes around the block, I said. If there's a lesson here, maybe it's that good fences make good neighbors, but only if both neighbors respect boundaries in the first place. The $78,000 fence. Was it worth it? It's been 8 months since the settlement. Patricia sold her house and moved to another state, reportedly to live closer to her daughter. Our neighborhood is peaceful again. The boys play in the backyard without us constantly watching for threats. Max runs and plays fetch without us tensing at every bark. Sarah's anxiety has improved significantly, though she still occasionally wakes in the night, certain she heard someone outside. Financially, we're slowly recovering. The second mortgage will take years to pay off, but we've implemented a strict budget and are making progress. Some neighbors organized a small fundraiser to help with our legal costs, raising about $5,000, a touching gesture that reminded us of the community support we'd sometimes lost sight of during our ordeal. Was our $3,200 fence worth the nearly $78,000 it ended up costing us in repairs, security systems, legal fees, and medical bills? That's a question we've asked ourselves many times. In purely financial terms, of course not. No fence is worth that kind of hardship. But there's another calculation, one that can't be measured in dollars and cents. Our fence became a symbol of our right to feel safe in our own home, to establish healthy boundaries, to protect our family from someone who refused to respect basic social and legal norms. Standing our ground against intimidation and harassment taught our boys a powerful lesson about not giving in to bullies, even when it's difficult. And in the end, we won more than just the right to keep our fence. We won back our peace of mind, our sense of security, and our belief that most people are fundamentally decent, despite the Patricia Wilkinses of the world who might temporarily convince us otherwise. The media attention eventually faded, though occasionally someone still recognizes us as the Fence family from the viral videos. Patricia has made no attempts to contact us since moving away, though we keep the restraining order paperwork easily accessible, just in case. The fence itself stands as solidly as the day it was installed, though we've made some aesthetic improvements, climbing roses along one section, a mural the boys painted on the inside portion facing our patio. We've reclaimed our yard and our home, transformed the fortress back into a haven. And every time I look at that fence, I'm reminded of something my grandfather used to say. Stand your ground on the things that matter, and let go of the things that don't. Our home, our safety, our peace of mind, these things mattered. They were worth fighting for, worth protecting, even if the price tag was far higher than we ever imagined a simple wooden fence could cost. And to anyone out there dealing with your own neighborhood, Patricia, remember this. Boundaries are not just physical constructions of wood or stone. They're assertions of your right to live peacefully, to protect what's yours, to create safe spaces for the people you love. Some people won't respect those boundaries without a fight. But as our story proves, sometimes that fight is worth having, no matter what it costs.